We're talking about hyperinflation and trying to prepare you mentally for what is coming, and hopefully you will be able to see the parallels from the past to what is happening today. And I believe this is all being done intentionally. In fact, Janet Yellen says this is going to be good for the country because we'll be able to have some systematic change, which is wonderful, isn't it? That's what we want more of. Let me give you some words from George J.W. Goodman. He was a money manager in the mid-1960s, and he wrote about what happened in Germany. And I just want you to watch the parallels here. Before World War I, Germany was a prosperous country with gold-backed currency, expanding industry, and world leadership in optics, chemicals, and machinery. The German mark, the British shilling, the French franc, the Italian lira, all had about equal value, and they were all exchanged 4 or 5 to the dollar. That was in 1914. In 1923, the exchange rate between the dollar and the mark was 1 trillion German marks to $1. Here's what happened. I told you about the central banker in Germany, and people were cautious about it, but he was an expert. He knew, and the central bank could control all of this. So in about 1919, 1920, the central bank decided that they were going to buy all of the government's debt. Hey, Stu, how much government debt was purchased by China last year?
Oh, my gosh. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it was significant.
It was zero.
Really?
It was zero. It was zero.
That's significant.
You know who has bought all of our debt? The Treasury. Do you know that the United States has one quarter of all of the dollars that are in circulation in the entire world right now? 1/4 of them have been printed since COVID started. We're printing money and buying our own debt. That's exactly what the German central bank did. And the German government said, well, now that they're buying our debt, we can spend more money. And they spent money like it was going out of style. Funny thing is, it actually was going out of style. Here's what happened. Ordinary citizens worked at their jobs. They sent their children to school. They worried about the grades. They maneuvered for promotions, rejoiced when they got them. Generally, they expected things to get better. Then the central bank started to move. The prices started to double. Between 1914 and 1919, they doubled. And then they doubled again just 5 months into 1922. Milk went from 7 marks per liter to 16. Beer, 5.6 to 18. They started to complain about the high cost of living. Professors, civil servants complained about getting squeezed. Factory workers were pressing for wage increases. An underground economy developed, aided by the desire to beat the tax collector. In something really, really great, the government, check this yourself. The government was very excited about union labor, and they wanted more great union jobs. And those union jobs, they were right in line with the government. And so if you had a union job, your wage went up with inflation. Isn't that great? The unions and the government working together. So everybody is kind of going through this. They're very concerned, obviously, but they're not panicked yet. Believe it or not, they're not panicked. They're struggling and tensions are very high. But then, on June 24th, 1922, the Nazis killed Walter Rathenau. He was their foreign minister. He was somebody that everybody liked. He was charismatic. He was popular, wealthy. And the idea that Germany could go back to the way it was before 1914, he kind of represented that. And he was kind of a father figure for all those people that were hoping that radicalism would not take over. Well, he was killed in office. And just listen to this. The Germans who wanted to believe that things were going to be okay could not handle the idea of the German minister being shot in a law-abiding society. Nervous citizens were deciding at that moment things are going to change, and they got out of the money of currency, and they started buying up real goods. This is when the German people who had any money bought diamonds, works of art, safe real estate. Now ordinary Germans began to get out of the marks into real goods. They would buy anything that they could. Pianos were bought by people who did not play the piano. Pianos became really hard to get your hands on. Pianos, people were buying them because the mark was worth less every single day, and prices went up. And the price of a piano, I mean, I know I'm going to lose money on this piano, but I'm not going to lose as much as the German mark. Just translate the German mark into the American dollar. Yet, the ruling authorities didn't see anything wrong. As prices went up, the amount of currency demanded was greater, and the central bank just kept printing more money. The unions and the government, all the civil servants, they just got a bigger paycheck. Well, the problem here is that it never really stopped. The German government was shaky and fragile, especially after the death of their leader, somebody that they saw was, maybe not a moderate. And that's why they couldn't stop the printing. Also, it's a shell game. You can't stop the printing if you're expecting everything to be okay. You have to rip the Band-Aid off. And there are very few people that want to rip the Band-Aid off because they'll lose. The ones who are making the Band-Aids, they know they'll lose. Well, unemployment started in, communists started in, everybody started to say this is not working. Once the printing presses began, once they were almost impossible to stop, a student at Freiburg University ordered a cup of coffee at a cafe. The price on the menu was 5,000 marks. He had 2 cups. When the bill came, it was for 14,000 marks. Wait, 14,000 marks? A cup of coffee was 5,000 marks. He said, if you want to save money and you want 2 cups of coffee, you should order them both at the same time. That's what was happening, and that is what's coming. People started buying diamonds, gold, country houses, antiques. They started buying stupid things, hairpins. They started buying soap. They started buying anything they could get their hands on. Meanwhile, crime was going through the roof. Copper pipes, they weren't safe. Gasoline was stolen from cars. People bought things they didn't need, but they used them to barter. A pair of shoes for a shirt, some crockery for coffee. Berlin had witches' Sabbath atmosphere. Prostitutes of both sexes roamed the streets. Cocaine was everywhere. Drugs everywhere. What happened after all of this? Well, they stopped inflation. They stopped inflation. And the way they stopped inflation was, even though we had plenty of money, but nothing our money could buy because the money was worthless, Germany was still a rich company. They had mines, they had farms, they had factories, they had forests. So they just introduced a new currency. And they backed the Rentenmark with mortgages on lands and bonds and the factories. Wait a minute. What? Yeah, you see, they just took everybody's mortgages and they said, oh, well, this is of value. And so we're going to use the strength of America. We're going to use Apple. We're going to use Grandma Greta's house. And we're going to use that to back up our currency. Does any of this sound familiar? Does any of this sound familiar? Like when Joe Biden says that the goal by 2030 is for the United States government to own 30% of everything in America, to preserve it. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound familiar at all when I say that 90% of all low-income housing and 70% of all regular housing, the mortgages, now backed by the United States government? Not backed by, insurance and banks, but backed by the United States government. In other words, if you default, they own it. Savings were never restored. But the biggest loss in Germany at the time was the value of hard work and fairness and decency. There was a different temper in the country. It was an atmosphere where a woman who, without batting an eyelash, demanded 100 million marks for an egg. She lost the capacity of surprise. Nothing, no matter how cruel or how crazy, would surprise her because they had gone through all of this. If you don't see the parallels, I don't know how to help you. If you do see the parallels, learn from the past. If you do see the parallels, you might want to start doing things like thinking like the Germans. What are people going to need? And what could I have stored up? I mean, a lot of people don't even think, you don't have to be rich to buy alcohol. Alcohol, in times like Germans had it, become medicine, becomes a painkiller. You have to start looking at things and think, what is it that people will need? And start putting your dollars there as inflation gets higher and higher. You could buy something today, and yeah, you may not be able to get the full price for it. Let's say you lose 10 cents on the dollar. Well, guaranteed this year, you're going to lose 15 cents on the dollar that's just sitting in the bank. What will hold its value better than the U.S. dollar?